We're restructuring the senior management tier, Marcus said, not making eye contact as he shuffled papers on his desk. Your position has been eliminated. I sat across from him, my hands folded neatly in my lap, the same position I'd maintained through thousands of meetings over my 32 years at Sterling Financial Group. The heavy oak desk between us had been there since before my time. Marcus had only been sitting behind it for 6 weeks. I see, I replied, my voice steady despite the hammering in my chest. May I ask about the timing? I'm scheduled to retire in less than 8 weeks. He finally looked up, his expression a practiced blend of regret and determination that didn't reach his eyes. At 38, Marcus Thorne was exactly the kind of CEO the board thought they needed. Young, aggressive, from one of those Silicon Valley firms that had been making headlines. The restructuring timeline is non-negotiable, he said. We need to implement these changes immediately to meet our quarterly projections. Human Resources will handle your exit package. He glanced at his watch. They're waiting for you now. I nodded, rising to my feet with the same composure I'd maintained through market crashes, hostile takeovers, and countless corporate storms over 3 decades. Thank you for the opportunity to serve Sterling, I said, extending my hand. I wish you and the firm continued success. Marcus seemed momentarily thrown by my calm. He shook my hand briefly, already reaching for his phone. Security will escort you to clear out your office. My name is Abigail Vance, Senior Vice President of Client Relations at Sterling Financial Group, or at least I was until about 15 minutes ago. I'm 64 years old, and I've devoted my entire professional life to building this firm from a regional investment office into a nationally respected financial institution. As I walked back to my office with the security guard trailing awkwardly behind me, I thought about the retirement party the team had been planning, the congratulatory emails that had already started arriving from clients and partners, the transition plan I'd spent months creating to ensure a seamless handoff. All of it meaningless now. Eleanor, my assistant for the past 12 years, was waiting by my office door, her eyes red. I just heard, she whispered. This is outrageous, Abigail. I squeezed her hand. It's business, Eleanor, nothing personal. But as I began gathering my personal items under the watchful eye of security, I couldn't help but think about Friday, tomorrow, and the standing golf game I'd had for 15 years with David Miller, president of Horizon Holdings, our largest investor, and Robert Chin from Novacorp, and Sarah Jenkins from Global Dynamics. I wondered if Marcus knew about those games, or what we discussed during them. Probably not. The security guard, Kevin, whom I'd personally hired 7 years ago, looked mortified as he followed me to my car with a small box of belongings. 32 years at Sterling, and all I had to show for it was a box containing a few photos, a potted plant, and a coffee mug my grandson had painted. I'm sorry about this, Mrs. Vance, he said quietly. It doesn't seem right. Don't worry about it, Kevin. You're just doing your job. I smiled at him as I placed the box in my trunk. How's your daughter doing at university? Still pursuing engineering? He looked surprised that I remembered. Yes, ma'am. Made the dean's list last semester. Wonderful. She'll go far. I closed the trunk and took one last look at the Sterling building. 15 stories of gleaming glass and steel in downtown Boston that hadn't existed when I first joined the company. Back then, we'd operated out of 3 cramped rooms above a pharmacy. As I drove home through the familiar streets of Boston, I felt oddly calm. The initial shock had worn off, leaving a hollow feeling in my chest that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief. 32 years, and Marcus hadn't even bothered to learn what I actually did for the company. My husband, Thomas, was waiting when I arrived home, alarm evident on his face. You're home early. What's happened? I've been restructured, I said, setting my box down on the kitchen counter. Effective immediately. What? They can't do that. You've given them your entire career. You're retiring in 2 months. His face flushed with indignation as I explained what had happened. "It's done, Thomas," I said finally. "No point getting worked up about it now. You've built half their client relationships. You're the reason Horizon Holdings invested with them in the first place." He paced the kitchen. "Have you called David? He'll be furious when he finds out." I shook my head. "I haven't called anyone yet." I checked my watch. "But I do need to change. I've still got dinner with Sarah tonight." Thomas stopped his pacing. "Sarah Jenkins from Global Dynamics?" I nodded, already heading upstairs to change. "Are you going to tell her?" I paused on the stairs. "I'm not going to hide it, but I'm not going to complain either." That had always been my approach throughout my career. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make threats. I simply did my job with integrity and let my work speak for itself. It had served me well for over 3 decades in a male-dominated industry where women of my generation were expected to serve coffee, not manage million-dollar portfolios. As I changed for dinner, I thought about my team, the people I'd mentored, promoted, and grown with over the years. I wondered what would happen to them under Marcus's leadership. I wondered what would happen to the firm. Sarah Jenkins was already seated when I arrived at Mercer's, the steakhouse where we'd been having our monthly dinners for nearly a decade. At 68, she remained one of the sharpest minds in investment banking, and under her leadership, Global Dynamics had grown into a powerhouse that controlled over $12 billion in assets. "Abigail," she said, rising to embrace me. "You look troubled. What's happened?" I'd intended to ease into the news, perhaps even downplay it, but Sarah had always been perceptive. As we settled in and ordered our usual drinks, bourbon for her, gin and tonic for me, I told her about my morning. "Sterling fired you?" She set her glass down with a sharp click. 2 months before your retirement? That's not just poor form, it's idiotic. "The new CEO wants to make his mark," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Restructuring is standard practice. There's nothing standard about removing the person who built your investor relationships 2 months before a funding round." She shook her head. "Especially not when that person has a standing golf game with David Miller." I felt a flicker of surprise. "You know about our Friday games?" "Everyone knows, Abigail. The 3 of us control nearly $200 million of Sterling's investment capital." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "What they might not know is that David was already nervous about this new CEO. He thought Marcus was too aggressive, too focused on quick returns rather than sustainable growth." I sipped my drink, saying nothing. "David called me after your last golf game," Sarah continued. "He asked what I thought about moving some of our investments. He wasn't comfortable with the direction Marcus was taking things." This was news to me. David had been loyally with Sterling for 18 years. If he was considering moving his funds, the situation was worse than I'd realized. "And what did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him, as long as you were there to keep things grounded, I wasn't worried." She gave me a pointed look. "That was last week. The situation has clearly changed." The waiter arrived with our salads, giving me a moment to process this information. I'd known my departure would cause some waves, but I hadn't realized just how precarious Marcus's position already was with our key investors. "I don't want anyone making decisions based on what happened to me," I said finally. "I've had a good career. I was nearly finished anyway." Sarah studied me over the rim of her glass. "Always the professional, Abigail. Always putting the firm first." She set down her drink. "But answer me this. Do you think Sterling is in good hands under Marcus Thorne?" The question hung between us, heavy with implication. For 32 years, I had been unfailingly loyal to Sterling. I had defended every decision, supported every leader, and put the firm's interests above my own time and again. But now, for the first time, I was on the outside, and from the outside, I could see clearly what I had been too close to notice before. "No," I said quietly. "I don't think it is." I was in my garden the next morning when my phone rang. Thomas was watching me from the kitchen window as I knelt among my roses, methodically removing the weeds that had sprouted during my long hours at the office. Gardening had always been my therapy, and today I needed it more than ever. The caller ID showed it was Robert Chin from NovaCorp, the third member of our regular golf foursome. I brushed soil from my hands before answering. "Good morning, Robert," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "If you're calling about golf today, I'm afraid I need to cancel." "I already know, Abigail," he replied, his normally jovial voice unusually somber. "David called me last night. We're both skipping golf today, too." I sighed, sitting back on my heels. News traveled fast in our circles. I was going to tell you both today. I didn't want to make a fuss. Getting fired 2 months before retirement after 32 years of service deserves at least a small fuss, Robert said. "David is livid. He's been calling board members since 5 a.m. That made me sit up straight. Robert, please tell David not to do anything rash on my account. These things happen in business. Companies restructure. This isn't about you, Abigail, not entirely." Robert paused. "We've all been concerned about Marcus's strategy. His presentation last month about moving away from relationship-based investments into more algorithm-driven decisions raised red flags. Your firing just confirms our fears about his judgment." My phone beeped with another incoming call, this one from David himself. "Robert, I need to take this. David is calling." "Of course, but, Abigail, you should know that Nova is reassessing our position with Sterling. I'll be in touch." My stomach tightened as I switched calls. "Good morning, David." "There's nothing good about it," David barked, bypassing any greeting. I just got off the phone with Arthur Peterson. Arthur was the chairman of Sterling's board, and David's tone told me the conversation hadn't gone well. "David, whatever you're thinking of doing, it's done. Abigail, I informed Arthur that Horizon Holdings is pulling out of the upcoming funding round, effective immediately." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words. Horizon Holdings' commitment to the funding round was nearly $80 million, money that Sterling was counting on to launch their expansion into new markets. "You didn't need to do that," I said quietly. "Yes, I did." David was uncharacteristically emotional. "It's not just about your firing, though that was unconscionable. It's what it represents. Marcus Thorne has been systematically dismantling everything that made Sterling worth investing in. He's replaced relationship managers with fresh MBAs who don't know our names. He's implemented arbitrary new fee structures, and now he's fired the one person who's kept our confidence through 3 decades. I hadn't realized things had deteriorated so quickly in the 6 weeks since Marcus had taken over. I'd been so focused on preparing for my retirement that I'd missed the broader changes happening around me. "The board's in emergency session now," David continued. "Sarah called me this morning. Global Dynamics is pulling their $40 million too. That was $120 million vanishing in less than 24 hours. Add Nova's likely withdrawal, and the total approached $180 million. I never wanted this," I said, feeling slightly sick. "I know you didn't. That's why we trust you." David's voice softened. "The board wants to meet with you today if possible." "Meet with me? Whatever for?" "To fix this mess, Abigail. To save their company." He paused. "You have more power right now than you realize. The question is, what do you want to do with it?" I looked down at my garden, at the roses I'd so carefully tended over the years, pruning away the dead branches to let the healthy ones flourish. Sometimes cutting back was necessary for growth, but it had to be done with care and understanding. Marcus Thorne had taken a chainsaw to what required pruning shears. "I'll meet with them," I said finally, "but I make no promises about what comes after." The Sterling boardroom felt different from the other side of the table. For decades, I'd sat alongside management, presenting reports, explaining strategies, and defending decisions. Now I was the outsider, facing a row of anxious faces, the 9 members of Sterling's board of directors. Arthur Peterson sat at the center, his normally composed expression strained. To his right was Victoria Coleman, who had hired me 32 years ago. To his left, several newer board members I knew primarily through quarterly meetings. Marcus Thorne was conspicuously absent. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, Abigail," Arthur began. "I want to start by saying that what happened yesterday was not a board-approved decision. We were informed after the fact." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral despite the small flare of vindication I felt. "I appreciate that clarification, Arthur. How can I help you today?" Victoria leaned forward. "We're in a crisis, Abigail. David Miller has pulled Horizon Holdings' entire investment from our upcoming funding round. Sarah Jenkins has done the same with Global Dynamics. Robert Chen is meeting with Nova's board this afternoon, but we expect the same result." "I've heard," I said simply. "In total, we're looking at a shortfall of $180 million, Arthur continued. "Without that funding, our expansion plans collapse. We'll need to cut departments, projects will be canceled, people will lose jobs." "People already have," I pointed out quietly. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. "We made a mistake," Victoria said finally. "We were so focused on bringing in new blood, on modernizing, that we forgot what makes Sterling work. The relationships that you and others have built over decades." Arthur nodded. "Marcus Thorne has been placed on administrative leave pending review, effective immediately." This surprised me. Moving this quickly against a CEO they'd hired only 6 weeks ago was unprecedented. The situation was even more dire than I'd realized. "What exactly do you want from me?" I asked. Victoria and Arthur exchanged glances. "We'd like you to reach out to David, Sarah, and Robert," Arthur said, "to see if they would reconsider their positions if certain changes were made at Sterling." "What changes?" "A reversal of Marcus's restructuring, for one," Victoria said. "Reinstatement of the senior relationship managers he let go. A formal apology to you with full benefits through your originally planned retirement date, plus appropriate compensation for the distress caused." I considered this. It was a generous offer, more than generous, but something still felt off. "And who would lead Sterling while you search for a new CEO?" I asked. Another uncomfortable silence. "We were hoping," Arthur said carefully, "that you might consider staying on, not as CEO necessarily, but in an executive role that would reassure our investors during the transition." I sat back, genuinely surprised. I was transitioning out. I was ready to retire. "We know." Victoria's voice was gentle. "And we would understand completely if you declined. But Abigail, there's no one else our investors trust the way they trust you." I thought about my team, the people who had been left rudderless by Marcus's hasty restructuring. I thought about the projects that would collapse without the funding round. I thought about Eleanor, who had cried when security walked me out. But I also thought about my garden, about the travel plans Thomas and I had made, about the 32 years I had already given to Sterling. "I need time to think," I said finally. "And I need to speak with David, Sarah, and Robert first. Not as your emissary, but as someone who cares about them and their investments. I need to understand exactly what their concerns are beyond my situation." "Of course," Arthur said quickly. "Take whatever time you need." As I stood to leave, Victoria followed me to the door. "For what it's worth, Abigail, I fought against your dismissal when I heard. We all did, but by then, it was already done." I studied her face, lined now with age and worry, but still the same woman who had taken a chance on me all those years ago. "I believe you," I said, "but good intentions don't undo damage once it's done. You all approved hiring Marcus. You gave him the authority to make these changes. The consequences of that decision don't disappear with an apology." As I walked out of the Sterling building for the second time in 24 hours, I realized I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Free. David, Sarah, and Robert agreed to meet me at my home that evening. It felt strange to host them in my living room rather than on the golf course or in a restaurant, but there was something appropriate about the setting. This was personal now. "I don't care what they offered you," David said bluntly after I'd explained the board's proposal. "I'm not putting another cent into Sterling with Marcus Thorne at the helm." "They've put him on administrative leave," I reminded him. "He's essentially fired." "Administrative leave can end," Sarah pointed out. "Unless there's a permanent change in leadership, I can't justify recommending Global Dynamics reinvest either." Robert nodded in agreement. The board enabled his decisions. They might do the same with the next CEO they hire. I served coffee as we talked, feeling oddly like a mediator rather than a participant. "The board is asking me to stay on in an executive role during the transition," I said, "to help rebuild investor confidence." All three looked at me with surprise. "Would you consider it?" Robert asked. I sighed. "I don't know. I was ready to retire. Thomas and I have plans." "Plans can be delayed," David said, then caught himself. "Though you certainly don't owe Sterling anything after how they treated you." "It's not about what I owe Sterling," I said slowly. "It's about the people who work there, the projects that will collapse without this funding, the clients who depend on our services." Sarah watched me with knowing eyes. "You've always put others first, Abigail. But maybe this time you should put yourself first." "What do you mean?" She set down her coffee cup deliberately. If you were to consider staying, it should be on your terms. Not as a figurehead to reassure investors while they find another young hotshot to replace Marcus, but in a real position of authority." David's eyes lit up. "Sarah's right. If they want you back, they should make you CEO." "CEO?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "That's not what I—" "It's exactly what they need," Robert cut in. "Someone who understands that investment isn't just about algorithms and quick profits. Someone who values relationships and long-term growth. Someone like you." Sarah finished. I sat back, genuinely stunned. "I'm 64 years old. I was planning to retire." "Age brings wisdom," David said, something sorely lacking in their recent decisions. As my three friends continued to build their case, I found myself thinking about what a Sterling under my leadership might look like. The changes I would make, the culture I would restore, the innovations I would keep from Marcus's brief tenure while discarding the harmful elements. It was an intoxicating vision. "I don't know," I said again, but with less certainty. Sarah reached over and took my hand. "Just promise us you won't sell yourself short. Whatever you decide to do, retire as planned, stay on temporarily, or take the helm, do it because it's what you want, not because you feel obligated." After they left, I found Thomas in his study. He'd given us privacy for our meeting, understanding its importance. "What will you do?" he asked, looking up from his book. I sat beside him, suddenly exhausted. "I don't know. What do you think I should do?" He closed his book thoughtfully. "I think you should do whatever will let you sleep peacefully at night. If that means walking away, we'll go to Italy as planned. If it means staying to fix what's broken, we'll delay Italy." He smiled. "Italy's been there for thousands of years. It can wait a little longer." I leaned against his shoulder, grateful for his understanding. "The board's desperate. I could ask for anything." "Then ask for what you're worth," he said simply. "Not a penny less." As I drifted off to sleep that night, I realized what I wanted to ask for. It wasn't just about position or compensation. It was about legacy and principles and setting things right. If Sterling wanted me back, they would need to understand exactly what they had almost lost: and what they needed to change to keep it from happening again. The following morning, I arrived at Sterling Financial Group for my meeting with the board on my own terms. The security guards nodded respectfully, no longer watching me as if I might steal office supplies. Word had gotten around. I wore my best suit, dove gray with a subtle blue pinstripe, and carried the leather portfolio Thomas had given me for our 30th anniversary. I looked every inch the executive I had always been, regardless of titles. The board was waiting, the tension in the room palpable. Arthur's assistant had called late the previous night, informing me that they were prepared to offer me the position of interim CEO, with the possibility of removing interim after 6 months. It was a significant offer, but it wasn't what I wanted. "Good morning," I said as I took my seat. All 9 board members responded with a chorus of greetings, their eagerness almost palpable. "Abigail, we've considered your value to this company very carefully," Arthur began. "We'd like to offer you the position of interim CEO with a review in 6 months for a permanent appointment. Full executive compensation, of course." I nodded, taking a moment before responding. "I appreciate the offer, Arthur, but I have a counter-proposal." I opened my portfolio and slid a document across the table, a single sheet of paper outlining my terms. Arthur and Victoria leaned forward to read it together, their expressions shifting from hopeful to surprised. "You don't want to be CEO," Victoria said, looking up. "No," I confirmed. "I want to be Chief Client Relations Officer, a new C-suite position with full board voting rights and authority over all client-facing operations. And you want this position created permanently in the company charter," Arthur added, still reading. "Not just for you, but as an ongoing role. Yes, the position would prioritize relationship building and maintenance over short-term profits, a balance to the more aggressive growth strategies." "And in return?" Victoria asked, though the answer was already on the page. "In return, I will personally reach out to David, Sarah, and Robert, as well as our other major investors, and ask them to reinstate their funding commitments. I will also agree to stay for 1 year, long enough to establish the position and train my successor." The board members exchanged glances, a silent conversation happening across the table. "And Marcus?" Arthur asked finally. "That's for the board to decide," I said. "But I would recommend finding him a role that utilizes his strengths without giving him unrestricted authority over client relationships." 3 days later, I stood at the podium in Sterling's largest conference room, addressing a packed audience of employees, board members, and most importantly, investors. David, Sarah, and Robert sat in the front row alongside representatives from a dozen other investment firms. "Change is inevitable in any organization," I said, my voice steady and clear. "But how we manage that change determines whether we grow stronger or lose what makes us special." I outlined the new vision for Sterling, a hybrid approach that embraced technological innovation while preserving the human relationships that had built our reputation. I introduced the new position of Chief Client Relations Officer and explained its role in ensuring that future decisions balanced growth with stability. "I'm pleased to announce that our funding round has been fully reinstated," I continued, to audible sighs of relief from the staff. "In fact, it has been oversubscribed by an additional $20 million, a testament to our investors' renewed confidence." From the corner of my eye, I could see Marcus Thorne standing at the back of the room. As promised, the board had found a role that suited his talents. Head of Innovation Strategy, reporting directly to the board rather than having autonomous authority. His expression was unreadable, but he nodded slightly when our eyes met. He was young. He would learn. When the announcement concluded, David approached me, hand extended. "Beautifully played, Abigail. You've secured your legacy without sacrificing your principles." "Or my retirement plans," I added with a smile. "Just delayed by a year." Sarah joined us, champagne flute in hand. "To the new Chief Client Relations Officer," she said, raising her glass. "May your successor uphold your standards." "They will," I assured her. I'll make certain of it. As I looked around the room at the relieved faces of my colleagues, I felt a deep satisfaction. Not the vindictive pleasure of revenge, but the quieter, more enduring satisfaction of restoration, of setting things right. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't made threats. I had simply left with the same grace I had led with, and let the people who truly knew my worth do the rest. What I hadn't expected was how much stronger I would return, having finally recognized that worth myself. 1 year later, I retired as planned, handing the role of Chief Client Relations Officer to Eleanor, my former assistant of 12 years, who understood better than anyone the importance of human connection in a world increasingly driven by algorithms. Thomas and I finally took our trip to Italy, and I found I could enjoy the vineyards and museums completely free of worry. The quarterly reports showed Sterling was thriving under its new balanced approach, with record client retention and steady, sustainable growth. In the end, my greatest revenge wasn't bringing down the man who had dismissed me so carelessly. It was building something more lasting than he ever could have. Something that would continue long after both of us had moved on. The lesson from this story is that true value lies not in titles or temporary power, but in strong relationships and integrity built over time. Even when faced with injustice, staying true to yourself, believing in your worth, and letting your work speak for itself will bring about better outcomes than any act of revenge. Patience, loyalty, and adaptability, along with prioritizing the common good over personal gain, will ultimately lead to genuine success and fulfillment.